So this is a conversation that I've been kind of avoiding because I know what kind of reaction is going to come about this. And if you guys have seen my recent post on Instagram, I want to let you know you're in good hands. I'm not going to be near as disrespectful as I was on there. The reason for it is there was certain Islamic extremist groups using my comment section to recruit members. And I posted on my story ahead of time and let everybody know, like, hey, I'm going to word things in a way that's going to bother people. If you see people getting mad in the comments, please don't engage with them. Like, I'm past that point on social media. I spent years on TikTok and doing rage bait. I'm past it. I don't want to deal with it. But in certain circumstances, I use what I used to do to make sure certain people just unfollow and go away. Now, that being said, I have a lot to explain here, and I understand a lot of people are going to be angry about this. So we're going to take it back quite a bit on how I reverted to Islam, why I came to this conclusion, and what brought me away from the Hadith. And I want to say ahead of time, if I was forced to follow Hadith, I would just leave the faith entirely and I would practice the Quran alone. I genuinely mean that. If the Hadith is forced upon me, I don't want any part of it. Now, I will explain why. So I reverted to Islam alone in my bedroom. There was no dawah, there was no influence, although I had somebody who's like an uncle to me who kind of half reverted while he was in prison. He's like a mentor to me. I look up to him quite often. He had spoken about Islam, spoken about the Quran, and kind of tried to push me in that direction. But there was no like real dawah. He wasn't really actually pushing. He just brought it up a couple times like, hey, buddy, you should look this up. This was in the peak of me being in the middle of the occult. He just brought it up a couple times. But I got to the point through my studies and in studying different theology from all walks of life down to Egyptians and Vikings and the Greek and the Norse and all these different belief systems, a lot of it being pagan, but also Christianity and the history of Christianity and Constantine and the Ark of Constantine, and just studied all these different things, and I love it. And I still continue to study all religions, not just one. That being said, I got to the point where the last two things that I needed to study was the Torah and the Quran. Now, at the time I had the Tiny Hat Club group was investing in me and keeping me moving on social media due to a contract from me selling a social media marketing agency that I once started. I sold off the contracts. These people bought the contracts from me because I got tired of doing it. I really didn't enjoy the work. And at the same time, they were working together a deal where they had owned other businesses. I would continue on TikTok and I would do promo work for their other businesses through the TikTok views. Now, of course, that never happened because of what happened in Palestine. I spoke out against that. They got angry with me. That's a different conversation. So I picked up the Torah and picked up the Quran at the exact same time. As I studied that faith that I won't mention on here, it got worse and worse. I just kept seeing more flaws within the rhetoric, more contradictions, more issues, and above all else, serious moral issues in the faith. Now, on the other hand, the more I studied the Islamic faith, the better it got. The more I studied the Quran, the more I got attached to it. And then the first time I heard the Quran in Arabic, it touched me and changed my life forever. So my loyalty initially was with the Quran, was with the Word of God, the thing that is flawless, has no mistakes. And this is what brought me to the faith and got me to the point where I was defending it endlessly, immediately, because I knew this was the Word of God. I know this came from God. There is no doubt in my mind that the Quran really is from Allah. Now, the first time I started doubting the Hadith, it was before I even studied it, which I will admit isn't really fair, right? Having doubts in something that you haven't looked into before isn't right. You should always study something before you doubt it. But this came through an argument on Twitter, right? A dumb, silly X or Twitter argument with people that were just attacking me left and right using crazy, wild Hadith quotes. And it got to the point where I just kept telling them, like, show me in the Quran where it says these things. Show me in the Quran where it disrespects the prophets. These hadith that they were referring to was very, very disrespectful to the prophets, and I know Islam does not do anything to disrespect them. So this was extremely contradictory, and it just got me to the point where my whole defense was, show me in the Quran. Don't show me some like hadith that I don't even know, some wild hadith. And this is because the Quran says multiple times that it is fully explained. We'll break down verses and contradictions and things in a little bit, but right now I kind of want to focus on how I started to get to this direction, just in case you're on the same path or you know somebody in a similar direction. Maybe you can convince them of your ways or otherwise. It doesn't matter to me. But anyways, the hadith that were being referenced was pretty bad. It was pretty brutal. They were calling the prophets some names that I'm not going to ever repeat. But all in all, that argument kind of did open my eyes a little bit, and I started to study hadith a little bit more. And then that's when the division came in. Now, since reverting, everybody has tried to push on me to decide Sunni or Shia so many different times, and I never wanted anything to do with it. I don't want anything to do with the division. Now, I know coming out and speaking about this and my beliefs against the hadith is going to cause a bit of division, but I just have to bite the bullet. This is because I've felt like it's been inauthentic the entire time that I haven't said anything to you guys. I've kind of blown off collabs with Sneeko and some other really big content creators because I just didn't feel like it was right. It wasn't fair. It wouldn't be cool if they would have me on their platform. I get all these positive benefits whenever I don't actually align with the same beliefs as them. I found that very disingenuous, so I did kind of blow off all these collabs and ignored them. And what I should have done is spoke about this sooner. I should have just told everybody from the beginning, I'm having doubt about the Hadith. I'm not certain quite yet. There's more stuff I'm studying. The more I'm learning about the Hadith, the worse it gets for me, the more it pushes me away from the faith. Now, on top of that, every time I get attacked from inside the community, it's people who follow the Hadith and follow it to a point where they put it above the Quran. I've been told multiple times that the Quran needs the Hadith. This is completely contradictory. The Quran is fully explained. It is telling us this in many different verses. Now, I know a lot of people are just going to be like, well, how do you pray? To me, that doesn't really sit very well. One, because the Quran does explain this very well. Later, I'll make a video explaining how I pray without Hadith and go over all the different issues that people have with this. I'm okay with explaining myself. I came to this conclusion through research and studies over a long period of time. I didn't just come up with this yesterday. So I have no issues explaining why and how I go about things and why I believe that this is the correct path. Now, that being said, there is a lot of people who do hold the Hadith above the Quran, and this isn't right. This isn't fair. We should never, ever, ever be holding the word of man. Even though you may believe it's the word of the prophet, that's okay. Everybody has their own path. But even if it is the teachings of the prophet, it is not the word of God. We cannot hold the Hadith above the Quran at all. So as a revert, and not just a revert, but one that came from the occult, who was literally doing rituals with demons, I'm constantly being attacked and slandered nonstop, but it wasn't by the general Islamic community. Everybody I've ran into in person has been extremely respectful, has been extremely nice, and they've all said the exact same thing. They have all told me, don't worry about those people that are going to judge you and attack you, just ignore them. When I first reverted, this is what everyone told me, and I didn't understand at the time. I had no clue that the haram police, really extreme negatives inside the community existed. I hadn't seen it yet. But those people are the things that push me away from the faith, and I know a lot of people who will not revert to Islam because of these individuals. They are truly pushing people out of the faith. Now, that is a really massive red flag. If you're pushing people away from the Quran, you work for Satan. It's that simple. But anyways, it's these kind of people who have planted the seed about this. And it was always the people who hold the Hadith above the Quran that's always attacking me and attacking everybody else online and pushing people away from the faith. So these are the people that planted the seed in the first place that made me kind of not have a good feeling about it. Now, before I continue, I'm about to start explaining Quran verses and contradictions within the Hadith that really make me not want to follow it. One of them being Aisha's age. There is a pretty significant issue within that one, or at least a couple issues. But I want everybody to know I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. What you follow is what you follow. You could be Christian, you can be occultist, I don't care. How you pray is none of my business. What you pray to doesn't affect me. I'm just here explaining my experiences and my beliefs. And this is also due to, I don't want there any confusion in the future. I don't want to feel like I'm misleading anybody based on my own self-identity. I don't want to believe like I'm telling people or putting up some image and I'm actually living this way. I don't want to separate that. It's a miserable place to be. I just don't want to be disingenuous to anybody. So I need to come out and be fully clean and transparent about this. Now, I have a couple verses pulled up. I will pop them up on screen as well. I know some people are going to argue that the translation's wrong. I've gone through this very deeply and I've pulled up multiple translations. There's tons of very good websites that translate Arabic, and I look at all the different translations through multiple different scholars, and what I do is I take the truth as the center. I look at all these translations and I see what is the consistency between every single one of them, and that's what I base this off of. So it's not just like picking one or the other. I look at all of them and then I take the similarities and say like, okay, this part has to be true because everybody who's translated it said these things. Now, the first one is chapter 11, first verse. The first verse in the 11th chapter explains this. And this was the first verse, ironically, that really stood out to me that kind of pushed me in this direction as well. And I'll pull up the exact thing that I'm referencing, but essentially what it says is that the book is fully perfected, that the Quran is in perfect detail. In other words, fully explained. Now, this was weird to me because it's like, okay, if the Word of God is fully explained meaning it doesn't need any explanation. What is the purpose of Hadith? And a lot of the people, every time I've heard, they've always just told me the Hadith explains how, or explains this, or explains why, and it's an explanation or a teaching to the Quran. But that doesn't make any sense when the Quran is saying it's fully explained. Now, the other verses which I have written down is chapter 6, verse 114, chapter 6, and verse 115. And I want everybody to be aware, I've spoken with scholars about this. I know a lot of people keep telling me this. They're like, you're not supposed to study Islam alone. It's like, dude, if I didn't study it alone, I would never be here. I would have never reverted. If you can't read the book and have faith alone, read the book by yourself on your own and have faith, then you don't have any faith at all. If somebody else has to tell you to have faith and how to have faith, then you don't have faith. What you're doing is just following what somebody else is telling you. You're not following what's inside of your heart. And so I have a major issue with this, where people saying that you're not allowed to just study by yourself. Now, that being said, once again, I have spoken with scholars, and there's also scholars that tell you pork is halal. So the scholars are also all over the place, and there's multiple scholars, which will be a later video. I'll explain there's other issues outside of contradictions with Hadith and the history of it that I don't really buy, that I'm not really sold on. But there are plenty of scholars that have spoke out against the Hadith, and crazy thing happens to them every single time. Either they get put in prison for hundreds of years, or their head disappears. This has been a consistent thing throughout history, and for me, this is a major red flag. And this is due to, if your faith is certain, if you know your faith is the word of God, you're not going to have to resort to violence. You're not going to be scared of somebody else's word. I'm not worried about the Christians preaching the Bible when I know the Quran is the truth. I'm not worried about them ever getting rid of the Quran. It's never going to go away. The word of God is here to stay. So I'm not worried about like Christians and Mormons and all these different faiths teaching or sharing their own experiences or sharing their own beliefs, or even trying to get people to believe the same thing as them. I'm not worried about it because I know the Quran's always here. So it's kind of odd whenever people resort to violence to stop a message. The problem with an idea is you can't ever get rid of it. You can get rid of people, but you can't ever get rid of ideas. It's always going to exist, and people will always have different perspectives. So going to the point of ending somebody's life to end somebody else's perspective is extremely wrong. And I say this for all beliefs. If you're doing that, then you're the bad guy. Now, once again, in chapter 6, this is verse 38, it talks about how not a thing is neglected in a book, or nothing is neglected in the Quran. After that is chapter 16, verse 89. It says, we have sent down to you the book as clarification for all things. Why does the word of God say for all things? Why do we need further explanation when it tells us the Quran is fully explained? Now, in chapter 45, verse 6, this is where it starts getting more concerning for me. When I read this verse, it talks about how the Quran is revealed to you. And then it also says, which is the scary part, it's like, and what hadith will people follow otherwise? And then that sounds to me like it's referring to itself as hadith, or using that name or that terminology. And it's saying, which one are you guys going to follow? Are you going to follow the one from somebody else, or are you going to follow the one from God? Now, on top of this, we're told, and the whole reason why the hadith exists is because of the verse where it talks about how we should follow the word of the prophets. Now, I firmly believe that means follow the Quran. This is what the prophets brought to us. This is what every single prophet has brought to us. And they followed the Quran, therefore we should follow the Quran as well. I don't think this means hadith, and I don't actually believe hadith is the word of the prophets. There's a lot of things that don't line up. I'll explain that other times. I'm going to run out of time on this video already. But in chapter 46, verse 9, it says, I do not bring anything new among the messengers, nor do I know what will happen to me or to you. I only follow what is revealed to me. So the prophet was ordered to follow only the Quran. Why would scholars later claim that the hadith is necessary? Now, in chapter 68, there's verse 36 through 38. It talks about how it says, what is wrong with you? How do you judge? Or do you have another book which you learn? This is another red flag to me, because it's like, why are we learning out of another book when the Quran tells us not to? These are serious contradictions, and I get it. I'm a revert. People are going to say all the time, like, oh, you've been a Muslim 5 minutes. It's like, I've been studying this for quite some time. I didn't just pick it up yesterday. And on top of it, if I reverted and found this fast, why hasn't it taken you this long to question it? Like, why don't you have the same concerns that I do? That's even more concerning because it starts to appear that people are just being told things and they're just following and listening to what their parents and their uncles are saying. Now, I do think that is partially true and it's unfortunate. I get it. It's going to happen. But what I've found to be true is a lot of people already think this way. They're just too scared to speak up. And that is another one of my concerns. It's like, I found there's a lot of people, and I'm telling you, a lot more people than a lot of you guys realize that don't like the Hadith. And even people who talk about it publicly don't follow it at all. And a lot of these massive dawah pages were in my DMs telling me I'm on the right path, that this is correct. Now, these are people that people perceive to be like Sunni and Shia and follow these certain sectors of Hadith. They agree with me. They just can't speak up. They're not allowed to say anything or else they're going to get publicly attacked and maybe privately attacked. So it puts people in a dangerous situation to be able to say these things, and which is another problem with me. I've had many threats on my life because of this, because I have a different belief than what is mainstream and pushed upon people. And that is a big issue. For people to threaten my life because my religious choice, just because I'm a part of the Islamic community, really makes me want to step away entirely. Now, that's never going to happen. I can't unsee the truth. The Quran is the truth. But there is people who are not Muslim pretending to be so. Now, I also want to clarify, I don't think every hadith ever is incorrect. Like, that is silly, and I've heard people talk about it, and I understand their perspective because they believe that the hadith is truly evil. And I do believe there is evil inside of it, but I do think a broken clock is right twice a day. There is hadith that are fundamentally correct, that are true, that if we follow this, there is beneficial things. Like, I've referenced them on multiple occasions. Like, certain things that are real and beneficial to our life, we should follow it. It's a benefit, it's a positive thing. So sure, throwing everything out the window, maybe not correct. But once again, a broken clock is right twice a day. The mass majority of it I find major holes in. And yes, there is always exceptions to the rule, but the exceptions don't make the rule. Now, the last bit of this, I'm going to go over the hadith about Aisha's age, because this one I find extremely disrespectful, and the main reason why the hadith causes major issues for the faith in the Quran. When you speak to people and you speak to Christians, they're always going to call the Prophet outside of his name. They're always going to call him a certain name that I'm not going to repeat. And they do it because of this hadith. You guys all know what I'm talking about. This hadith actually contradicts the Quran, and I find it, and I have mixed emotions on people who defend it. Now, I was one of these people at one point in time where I would say that the age is just misinterpreted, that the age is actually about 10 years older, and there is something to back that up, sure. But above all else, it contradicts the Quran. So from what I've been taught and from what I've seen, if a hadith contradicts the Quran, it is invalid. And so if it contradicts the Quran, why are people supporting this hadith? That makes me really nervous, because are these certain people, you know which people I'm talking about, a part of the community? Are they actually there? And are they using this hadith as a weapon to be able to do these nasty things? This is actually happening. This is a serious problem, because that is a real situation that has happened and has continued to happen. Now, of course, I get it. We find it in every single religion, but we don't need it in ours. Now, the contradiction, there's a couple. I'm not going to go into every little detail. You guys can do your own research on this if you want. But the big one I'm going to point at is chapter 33, verse 32, where it refers to Aisha as woman, not girl. This is a serious contradiction, because a 6 or 9-year-old is not a woman. Some people want to pretend like they can reach puberty at this age, but it is next to zero. There's like a next to 0% chance. I get it. It's Aisha we're talking about. So, there's always going to be exceptions, but a 6-year-old has not reached puberty by the Quran standards or anybody else's standards. Like I said, the other contradictions back this up, but this is the main one for me. And this verse said, "You are not like any other woman." Now, I'm going to mispronounce this most likely, but it uses Nisa. I can understand a decent amount of Arabic, I just don't ever try to speak it. So the way I read it in my head is probably wrong, but you guys understand what I'm saying. It's saying Nisa, meaning woman. It refers to Aisha as a woman, and it never refers to her as a girl. A 6-year-old is a girl. A 6-year-old is not a woman by anybody's standards. There's no 6-year-old that has reached maturity. So not only is this extremely disrespectful to the Prophet, this is extremely disrespectful to Aisha as well. This is the main thing that drives a wedge between Islam and the rest of the world. This exact hadith. And this hadith has multiple contradictions. There's some pretty good videos on YouTube. You guys can pull it up. These guys have explained it in better detail than I can myself. I just have some cliff notes to work off of just to bring to you guys so you guys understand where I'm coming from and my perspective on things. Now, that being said, I appreciate you guys for sitting around and listening and going through all this with me. This is my perspective and it's not going to change. I've done extensive research. I've spoken to people on every side of the fence. I've spoken to Shia and Sunni and all these different people who are extremely educated, more educated than myself. I've brought this knowledge from a multitude of places, not just inside my head, not just opinions, not just how I feel. This is the hardcore facts and evidence. And the reason why I've fully made this decision where I'm not a fan of the hadith. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's right. I find it extremely disrespectful. And above all else, I find it very contradictory to the Quran. I understand people follow the hadith based off of that one Quran verse where it tells us we need to follow in the way of the prophets, in other words. I do not believe that this means follow the hadith, which I also believe to be corrupted. If you guys really want, I'll explain it in another video. I don't care to make this point or try to convince people another direction. I'd rather continue focusing on personal development things and things that can benefit people's lives, like getting rid of jinn and more paranormal investigation stuff. But if you guys really, really need me to explain myself, I can go into deeper detail on why I do believe that a lot of the hadith, now I'm not going to say all, but a lot of the hadith has been corrupted by a certain group of individuals to cause division and to mislead everybody.